Sometimes the most powerful moments happen in the most unexpected places. When a decorated Navy SEAL commander walks into a military boot camp, he expects to see raw recruits pushing their limits. What he doesn't expect is to freeze mid-step, his breath catching in his throat, as his eyes lock onto a small tattoo on a female recruit's wrist. In that single moment, 15 years of carefully buried memories come rushing back like a tidal wave. A promise made by two children, a friendship that shaped a man's entire life, and a girl who vanished without a trace, leaving behind only questions and a heart that never quite healed. But this isn't just any recruit struggling through the brutal training. This is someone who carries scars deeper than any physical wound, someone running from a past that refuses to stay buried. As laughter and mockery echo around the training grounds, neither the commander nor the recruit realizes that their worlds are about to collide in ways that will change everything they thought they knew about survival, loyalty, and second chances. What happens when the boy you once saved becomes the man who might be your only hope? And what price are you willing to pay when the past refuses to let go? The morning sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty training ground at Naval Station Great Lakes, casting long shadows across the obstacle course where 32 recruits struggled through their morning drills. Commander Jake Morrison walked the perimeter with practiced eyes, his weathered face showing no emotion as he watched the newest batch of hopefuls attempt to prove they belonged in the Navy. At 35, Jake had seen it all. 15 years of active duty, multiple deployments, and countless missions that most people couldn't imagine in their worst nightmares. His reputation preceded him wherever he went. The SEAL who never left anyone behind. The commander who could break you down and build you back up stronger than you ever thought possible. Today, he was here for a routine inspection, evaluating the training program that would shape the next generation of naval personnel. The recruits moved through their exercises with varying degrees of success. Some showed natural ability, their movements fluid and confident. Others struggled, their faces red with exertion and embarrassment as drill sergeants barked orders and corrections. Jake had learned long ago not to judge too quickly. Sometimes the ones who struggled the most in the beginning became the strongest in the end. His attention was drawn to a commotion near the rope climbing station. A group of male recruits had formed a loose circle, their laughter carrying across the training ground. In the center, a female recruit hung from the rope, her arms shaking with fatigue as she tried to pull herself higher. She had made it about halfway up the 30-foot rope before her strength began to fail. "Come on, Martinez," one of the male recruits called out, his voice dripping with mockery. "My grandmother could climb faster than that, and she's been dead for 5 years." The others joined in with their own comments, each trying to outdo the last in their cruel observations. Jake felt his jaw tighten slightly. Hazing was part of military training, but there was a line between pushing someone to be better and breaking them down for sport. The recruit they called Martinez hung there for another few seconds, her dark hair plastered to her head with sweat, before she began to slide down the rope. Her hands were raw and bleeding. Jake could see even from his distance. She hit the ground hard, stumbling backward and nearly falling before catching herself. "Pathetic," another recruit sneered. "Why don't you just quit now and save us all the trouble? This isn't a place for weaklings." Jake started walking toward the group, his commanding presence causing conversations to die as he approached. But something made him stop dead in his tracks. As Martinez pushed herself back to her feet, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, her sleeve rode up slightly, revealing her left wrist. There, small and delicate against her olive skin, was a tattoo that made Jake's world tilt on its axis. A tiny anchor intertwined with a heart, with the initials JM inscribed beneath it in cursive script. The design was simple, almost childlike in its execution, but Jake recognized it instantly because he had drawn it himself on a piece of notebook paper 23 years ago. The memories hit him like a physical blow. He was 12 years old again, sitting in the ruins of an old warehouse in Detroit, sharing a stolen candy bar with the girl who had saved his life, Emma Santos, though she had been Emma Rodriguez then, before her mother remarried. She was 8 years old, tiny for her age, with fierce dark eyes and a stubborn streak a mile wide. Jake had been running from his father's latest drunken rage when he stumbled into the wrong neighborhood. 3 older boys had cornered him, demanding the few dollars he had in his pocket. When he refused, they had knocked him down and started kicking. That's when Emma appeared out of nowhere, screaming at them to leave him alone. She was half their size but completely fearless, swinging a broken piece of rebar like a weapon until they backed off and ran. She had helped him to the abandoned warehouse where she sometimes hid when things got bad at home. While she cleaned the blood from his split lip with a torn piece of her own shirt, she had listened to his story without judgment. In return, she told him about her own struggles. A mother who worked 3 jobs and still couldn't keep food on the table. a stepfather who drank too much and hit too hard, and a world that seemed determined to crush anything good or hopeful. They became inseparable after that day. Jake would sneak out of his house whenever possible to meet Emma at their secret place. She taught him how to move through the streets without being noticed, how to find food when there wasn't any, and how to disappear when danger approached. He taught her to read better, sharing books he borrowed from the library, and showed her how to draw, sketching pictures of all the places they would go when they were old enough to leave Detroit behind. The anchor and heart design came during one of their last conversations. Jake had decided he was going to join the Navy when he turned 18. He wanted to see the world, to become someone important, someone who mattered. Emma had insisted he draw the design for her, making him promise that no matter what happened, no matter how far apart they ended up, they would never forget each other. "Promise me," she had said, her small hand gripping his with surprising strength. "Promise me that if we ever meet again, even if we're completely different people, even if years and years have passed, we'll still remember who we were in this moment." Jake had promised. And 2 weeks later, Emma and her family disappeared. Her neighbors said there had been trouble with drug dealers, that the family had fled in the middle of the night. Jake spent months looking for her, checking every homeless shelter and community center in the city, but it was as if she had vanished into thin air. Eventually, he gave up searching, but he never forgot his promise. Now, 23 years later, he was staring at that same design tattooed on the wrist of a Navy recruit who was being mocked by her peers for not being strong enough. The irony was almost too much to bear. This was Emma. It had to be. The girl who had been the strongest person he had ever known, who had saved his life when she was just 8 years old, was now being called weak by people who didn't know the first thing about real strength. "Martinez!" The drill sergeant's voice cut through Jake's memories like a knife. "Since you can't seem to manage a simple rope climb, why don't you give us all a demonstration of what you can do? Drop and give me 50 push-ups, now." Emma Martinez immediately dropped to the ground and began her push-ups. Jake watched as she pushed through each repetition with grim determination, her form perfect despite her obvious exhaustion. The other recruits continued their commentary, making jokes about her technique and her appearance, but she didn't respond to any of it. She simply kept going, one push-up at a time, until she reached 50. When she finished, she sprang back to her feet and stood at attention, waiting for the next command. There was no complaint, no excuse, no sign that she was anything other than completely ready for whatever came next. Jake recognized that look. It was the same expression she had worn all those years ago when she decided to take on 3 boys twice her size to protect a stranger. The drill sergeant seemed somewhat impressed despite himself. "All right, Martinez, back to the rope. And this time, pretend your life depends on it." Emma approached the rope again, this time ignoring the continued mockery from her fellow recruits. She spat on her hands to improve her grip, wiped the blood from her palms on her pants, and grabbed the rope. This time, she began to climb with a different energy. Each pull was deliberate and controlled, her legs wrapping around the rope to help support her weight as she made steady progress upward. Jake found himself holding his breath as he watched her climb. The other recruits had grown quieter now, perhaps sensing that something had changed. Emma's face was a mask of concentration as she pulled herself higher and higher. When she reached the top of the rope and rang the bell, a few of the recruits actually applauded, though others continued to mutter dismissive comments. As she rappelled down, Jake made his decision. He couldn't approach her directly, not here, not in front of everyone. But he needed to know for certain if this was really Emma Santos, the girl who had saved his life and then disappeared without a trace. More importantly, if it was her, he needed to understand what had brought her here and why she was using a different name. The training session continued for another hour, with Jake observing from various positions around the course. He watched Emma tackle each obstacle with the same quiet determination she had shown on the rope. She wasn't the fastest or the strongest, but she never quit, never complained, and never let the constant stream of criticism from her peers affect her performance. When the session finally ended and the recruits were dismissed for lunch, Jake lingered near the training ground, ostensibly reviewing his notes, but actually watching to see which direction Emma would go. She walked alone toward the mess hall, her posture straight despite her obvious exhaustion. Jake waited until she was out of sight, then made his way to the administration building. If Martinez was really Emma Santos, there would be a record of her background, her reasons for enlisting, and most importantly, her real identity. As a visiting commander, Jake had access to personnel files for evaluation purposes. It wouldn't be difficult to find what he was looking for. 20 minutes later, Jake sat in a small office staring at a computer screen that confirmed his suspicions and raised a dozen new questions. Emma Rodriguez Santos Martinez. She had kept parts of all her names over the years. Born in Detroit, Michigan, just as he remembered. but her file showed a history that made Jake's chest tighten, with a mixture of anger and sorrow. She had spent 2 years in foster care after her family disappeared, bouncing between homes until she aged out of the system at 18. From there, the record showed a series of odd jobs, a brief stint at community college, and then several years working as an EMT in Chicago. Her application for naval service included a personal statement that spoke of wanting to serve something larger than herself and to develop the discipline and skills needed to make a real difference in the world. What the file didn't say, but what Jake could read between the lines, was that Emma had spent the last 23 years struggling to survive in a world that seemed determined to knock her down at every opportunity. The scared 8-year-old who had saved his life had grown into a woman who was still fighting, still refusing to give up despite everything that had been thrown at her. Jake closed the file and leaned back in his chair. Emma was here, just 50 yards away, probably eating lunch in the mess hall, completely unaware that the boy she had saved all those years ago was now in a position to help her. The question was, what was he going to do about it? He thought about their promise, made in the ruins of an old warehouse by 2 children who had already seen too much of the world's cruelty. She had asked him to remember who they were in that moment, regardless of how much time passed or how much they changed. Well, he remembered. The question was whether she would remember him, and whether she would want to be reminded of a past she had clearly tried very hard to leave behind. Jake made his decision. Tonight, after the official training day ended, he would find a way to speak with her privately. He owed it to the 8-year-old girl who had saved his life, and he owed it to the woman she had become, who was still fighting battles that no one else could see. Whatever had brought her here, whatever she was running from or toward, she didn't have to face it alone anymore. The boy she had saved had grown up to become exactly what he had promised. Someone important. Someone who mattered. And now, finally, he had the chance to return the favor she had done for him all those years ago. He just hoped that when the time came, he would be brave enough to be the person she had believed he could become. The evening air at Naval Station Great Lakes carried a chill that hadn't been present during the scorching afternoon training session. Most recruits had retired to their barracks after dinner, exhausted from another grueling day of physical and mental challenges. Emma Martinez sat alone on a bench outside the mess hall, methodically wrapping her bloodied hands with medical tape she had gotten from the infirmary. She moved with practiced efficiency, having treated similar injuries countless times during her years as an EMT. The rope burns were painful but not serious, nothing compared to some of the wounds she had patched up on Chicago's south side. As she worked, she replayed the day's events in her mind, analyzing her performance and identifying areas for improvement. The mockery from her fellow recruits didn't bother her as much as they probably hoped it would. She had endured far worse than their juvenile taunts and lived to tell about it. What did concern her was the feeling that she was being watched. Throughout the day, she had caught glimpses of the visiting SEAL commander observing the training exercises, and more than once she had felt his gaze lingering on her specifically. Emma had learned long ago to trust her instincts, and every instinct she possessed was telling her that Commander Morrison's interest in her went beyond simple evaluation of recruit performance. There was something familiar about the way he moved, the set of his shoulders, even the way he tilted his head when he was thinking. It reminded her of someone, though she couldn't quite place who. She was so lost in thought that she didn't hear footsteps approaching until a shadow fell across her hands. Looking up, she found herself staring into the face of Commander Morrison himself. Up close, his features were even more familiar, though she still couldn't identify why. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, gesturing to the empty space beside her on the bench. Emma straightened automatically, falling into the respectful posture expected when addressing a superior officer. "Of course, sir, please." Jake settled onto the bench, leaving a respectful distance between them. For a moment, neither spoke. He studied her profile, noting the strong jawline and determined set to her mouth that he remembered so well. She had grown into the strength that had been evident even in childhood, not just physical strength, but the kind of inner resilience that couldn't be taught or manufactured. "Rough day on the obstacle course," he finally said, nodding toward her bandaged hands. Emma glanced down at her hands and then back at him. "Nothing I can't handle, sir. The rope climbing technique just needs some refinement." "How watched you make it to the top on your second attempt? That took guts, especially with your hands already torn up from the first try." She didn't respond immediately, unsure where this conversation was heading. In her experience, when superior officers singled out individual recruits for private conversations, it usually meant trouble. She had been careful to follow every regulation, complete every assignment, and maintain the proper attitude despite the constant harassment from her peers. "Sir, If there's an issue with my performance or conduct, I'd prefer to address it directly, she said. Jake almost smiled at that. Even as a child, Emma had been refreshingly direct, never one to dance around difficult subjects or waste time with pleasantries when there was something important to discuss. Some things, apparently, never changed. There's no issue with your performance, Martinez. If anything, I'm impressed by your determination. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I wanted to ask you about your tattoo. Instinctively, she pulled her sleeves down to cover her wrists, though she knew it was too late. Very few people had ever seen that tattoo clearly, and she had never discussed its meaning with anyone. It was too personal, too connected to a part of her life she had worked hard to move beyond. Sir, I'm not sure what you mean, she said carefully. The anchor and heart on your left wrist, with the initials JM. Jake watched her face as recognition began to dawn. It's a very specific design, almost like something a child might draw. Emma felt the blood drain from her face. There was only one person who had ever seen that design, only one person who knew its significance. But that was impossible. The boy she had known all those years ago was named Jake Morrison, and while those were certainly the same initials, the idea that the scared 12-year-old she had protected in Detroit had grown up to become a decorated Navy SEAL commander seemed too incredible to believe. I think you have me confused with someone else, sir, she said. But her voice lacked conviction. Jake reached into his wallet and pulled out a small, worn piece of paper. He unfolded it carefully and held it out to her. It was the original drawing, the same anchor and heart design, rendered in pencil on lined notebook paper. The paper was yellowed with age and soft from years of being carried, but the drawing was still clearly visible. Emma stared at the paper as if it were a ghost from her past. Which, in many ways, it was. She had forgotten that Jake had kept the original drawing, forgotten that he had promised to carry it with him wherever he went. The fact that he still had it after all these years, that he had kept that promise, hit her like a physical blow. Jake, she whispered, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking. Jake Morrison. Hello, Emma, he said softly. It's been a long time. For a moment, Emma was 8 years old again, sitting in their secret hideout and listening to Jake talk about all the places he wanted to see, all the things he wanted to do when he grew up. She remembered the dreams he had shared, the fears he had confided, and the promise they had made to never forget each other. Then reality came crashing back. She was no longer a child, and this wasn't a reunion between old friends. He was a commanding officer, and she was a recruit. The power dynamic between them made any personal relationship complicated at best and potentially disastrous at worst. Sir, she began, falling back on military protocol as a shield against the emotional turmoil threatening to overwhelm her.
Don't, Jake said firmly.
Don't hide behind rank and regulations, not with me. Not after everything we've been through. Everything we've been through? Emma's voice carried a note of bitterness that surprised them both. Jake, we were children playing pretend in an abandoned building. Whatever connection we had ended 23 years ago when my family had to disappear in the middle of the night. I looked for you, Jake said quietly. For months after you left, I went to every shelter, every community center, every place I could think of. I never stopped wondering what happened to you. Emma laughed, but there was no humor in it. What happened to me? The same thing that happens to most kids who grow up the way we did. I survived, Jake. That's what happened to me. I survived foster care and aging out of the system and working 3 jobs to put myself through EMT training and a dozen other things that would probably shock you. Nothing about you could shock me, Emma. You were the strongest person I knew when you were 8 years old. I can't imagine that's changed. Strength, Emma repeated, shaking her head. Is that what you call it? Because most days it feels more like stubbornness. Or stupidity. I'm 31 years old, Jake. I'm starting over from scratch again, because apparently I never learned when to quit. Why did you enlist? Jake asked. And why are you using Martinez instead of Santos? Emma was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the darkening sky. When she finally spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. Martinez was my mother's maiden name. I started using it a few years ago when I needed to distance myself from some previous associations. What kind of associations? She turned to look at him, directly for the first time since he had revealed his identity. The kind that would probably end both our careers if certain people found out about them. Jake, whatever you think you know about who I am or who I've become, you need to understand that I'm not the same person you knew in Detroit. A lot has happened since then. A lot of bad things. Tell me, he said simply. Emma studied his face, looking for any sign of judgment or condescension. She found none, only the same patient attention he had shown when they were children, and she was explaining some new survival technique she had learned on the streets. After we left Detroit, my stepfather got involved with some very dangerous people. Drug dealers mainly, but also some organized crime connections. When I was 16, he tried to use me as collateral for a debt he couldn't pay. Emma's voice remained steady, but Jake could see the tension in her shoulders. I got away before anything happened, but I had to leave my mother and sister behind. I've been running from those connections ever since. And now you're here, Jake said. And now I'm here, she confirmed. Trying one last time to build something that can't be taken away from me. The Navy offers structure, security, and a chance to serve something bigger than my own survival. If I can make it through training, if I can prove myself worthy of the uniform, then maybe I can finally stop running. Jake felt a familiar surge of protective anger, the same emotion that had driven him to excel in every aspect of his military career. The idea that Emma had spent decades running from threats and dangers while he had been building a successful career and reputation made him want to find the people who had forced her into that life and make them pay. You don't have to prove anything to anyone, he said. You've already proven more than most people ever will. The question is, what do you need from me? Emma looked startled by the question. What do you mean? I mean that I'm in a position to help you now. I have influence, connections, resources. If there are people you're still running from, if there are problems that need to be solved, I can make those problems go away. Jake, no. Emma's response was immediate and firm. Whatever you're thinking, the answer is no. I didn't come here looking for a rescue. I came here to rescue myself. That's not what I meant. Yes, it is. She stood up from the bench, putting physical distance between them. It's exactly what you meant. You want to be the hero, just like you always did when we were kids. But I'm not 8 years old anymore, and I don't need someone else to fight my battles for me. Jake stood as well, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. Emma, I'm not trying to fight your battles for you. I'm trying to offer you options you might not have considered. Options like what? Using your rank and influence to get me special treatment? Making sure the other recruits stop giving me a hard time? Pulling strings to guarantee my success in the program? Emma shook her head. That's not strength, Jake. That's dependency. And if there's one thing I learned from growing up the way we did, it's that the only person you can truly depend on is yourself. That's not true, Jake said. You depended on me once. You trusted me enough to save my life, to share your hiding place, to make promises about remembering each other. Doesn't that count for something? Emma was quiet for a moment, the fight going out of her as suddenly as it had appeared. Of course it counts for something. Jake, what we had as children was probably the most innocent and pure friendship either of us will ever experience. But that doesn't mean we can just pick up where we left off. Too much has happened. Too much has changed.
Not everything has changed, Jake said softly.
I still remember the girl who was braver than anyone had a right to be. I still remember the promises we made. And I still believe that some connections are too important to let go of, no matter how much time has passed. Emma felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, an emotional response she had trained herself out of years ago. Jake, what are you asking of me? I'm asking you to let me be your friend again. Nothing inappropriate, nothing that would compromise your position or mine. Just let me care about what happens to you. Let me worry when you're struggling and celebrate when you succeed. Let me be someone you can talk to when things get difficult. And what if I can't do that? Emma asked. What if I've become too damaged, too closed off, too afraid of letting people get close? What if the girl you remember doesn't really exist anymore? Jake stepped closer, close enough that she could see the sincerity in his eyes. Then I'll get to know the woman she became instead. Emma, I've spent 15 years in the military, and I've learned that the most important battles aren't the ones fought with weapons or tactics. They're the ones fought against loneliness, despair, and the belief that we have to face everything alone. Emma looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for any sign that this was some kind of elaborate manipulation or test. She found none. What she saw instead was the same basic decency and kindness that had drawn her to him when they were children, now tempered by years of experience and responsibility. The other recruits are going to notice if you start showing me special attention, she said finally. Then we'll be careful about it. And for what it's worth, I don't think you need special attention. I think you need what you've always needed. Someone who believes in you completely and without reservation. Despite herself, Emma felt a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. You always were too optimistic for your own good. and you always were too stubborn for yours. I guess some things really don't change." They stood there in comfortable silence for a moment. Two people who had found each other again across decades and circumstances that should have made such a reunion impossible. The scared children they had once been were gone, replaced by adults who carried their own burdens and battle scars. But the connection that had formed between them in that abandoned warehouse still existed, changed but not broken by time and distance. "Jake," Emma said quietly, "there are things about my past, about the life I've lived since leaving Detroit, that you don't know. Things that might change how you feel about maintaining this friendship. Are you talking about illegal things? Immoral things? Or just difficult things?" "Mostly difficult things, some illegal things, but only when I had no other choice. Never immoral things, at least not by my definition of morality." "Then it doesn't matter," Jake said simply. "Whatever you did to survive, whatever choices you made when you were alone and afraid, they don't change who you are at your core, and they certainly don't change what you mean to me." Emma felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen, a tension she had carried for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to be without it. For the first time in years, maybe decades, she wasn't completely alone in the world. Someone knew her real story, at least the beginning of it, and they still wanted to be part of her life. "This is going to be complicated," she said. "Most worthwhile things are," Jake replied. "But Emma, we already survived the hardest part. We survived being children in a world that didn't care whether we lived or died. Everything else is just details." As they walked back toward the barracks, Emma found herself hoping that Jake was right. Because if he wasn't, if this reunion was destined to end in disappointment or disaster, she wasn't sure she had the strength to start over again. But for tonight, for this moment, it was enough to know that she wasn't facing the future entirely alone. 3 weeks had passed since Jake Morrison had recognized the tattoo on Emma Martinez's wrist, and the careful friendship they had rebuilt was being tested in ways neither of them had anticipated. Emma's performance in training had steadily improved, though she continued to face resistance from some of her fellow recruits who seemed determined to prove she didn't belong in their ranks. Jake had managed several brief, carefully orchestrated conversations with her during his extended stay at the training facility, officially there to evaluate new training protocols. Each conversation revealed more layers to the complex person Emma had become, and each one made Jake more determined to help her succeed, though he was careful never to show her any obvious favoritism. On this particular morning, Jake was reviewing personnel files in the administrative building when Captain Sarah Chen, the base commander, knocked on his office door. She entered with a grim expression that immediately put Jake on alert. "We have a problem, Commander Morrison," she said, closing the door behind her and taking a seat across from his desk. "It's about Recruit Martinez." Jake felt his stomach clench, though he kept his expression neutral. "What kind of problem?" Captain Chen placed a thick manila folder on the desk between them. "Yesterday, we received a visit from 2 federal agents, asking questions about Martinez. They seemed particularly interested in her background prior to enlisting and wanted to know if she had been in contact with anyone from her past." Jake's blood ran cold, but he maintained his composure. "Did they say what agency they represented?" "FBI, though they were vague about the specifics of their investigation, they left their contact information and asked to be notified if Martinez exhibited any unusual behavior or if anyone showed unusual interest in her." Captain Chen leaned forward slightly. "Jake, I've known you for 8 years. You're one of the most professional officers I've ever worked with. So I'm going to ask you directly, is there something you need to tell me about your interest in this particular recruit?" Jake found himself at a crossroads that he had been dreading since his reunion with Emma. He could lie, maintain plausible deniability, and hope that whatever was pursuing Emma would pass by without incident. Or he could trust Captain Chen with the truth and potentially compromise both his career and Emma's future in the Navy. "Sarah, what I'm about to tell you is highly personal and potentially damaging to both Recruit Martinez and myself. I need your word that this conversation stays between us unless absolutely necessary for her safety." Captain Chen studied his face for a moment, then nodded. "You have my word, but Jake, if this involves anything illegal or any breach of military protocol, I'll have to take appropriate action." Jake took a deep breath and began to tell the story he had never shared with anyone. The story of Emma Santos, the 8-year-old girl who had saved his life in Detroit, and how she had become Emma Martinez, the recruit who was now apparently being pursued by federal agents. When he finished, Captain Chen sat back in her chair, processing everything she had heard. "So you've known Martinez since childhood, but you haven't seen her in over 20 years until 3 weeks ago?" "That's correct. Our reunion was completely accidental. I had no idea she was even alive, let alone that she had enlisted in the Navy. And these federal agents are likely connected to her stepfather's criminal associations from years ago. That would be my best guess, though Emma has been very careful about not revealing too many specifics about what she's been running from.
Captain Chen was quiet for a moment, then opened the folder she had brought with her.
Jake, there's something else you need to know. After the agent's visit, I did some additional research into Martinez's background. What I found is concerning. She pulled out several official-looking documents and spread them on the desk. Emma Santos Martinez has been living under at least 4 different identities over the past 15 years. She's been arrested twice, once for assault when she was 19, charges later dropped, and once for fraud when she was 25, though that also seems to have been dismissed. Jake felt a surge of defensive anger. Sarah, you don't understand what her life has been like. She's been running from dangerous people for more than half her life. Sometimes survival requires making choices that look bad on paper but make perfect sense in context. I'm not judging her, Jake, but there's more. Captain Chen pulled out another document. 2 years ago, Emma Martinez was a witness in a federal RICO case against a Chicago crime family. Her testimony helped convict 3 high-ranking members of the organization. She's been in witness protection since then. The pieces suddenly clicked into place in Jake's mind. Emma's evasiveness about her recent past, her use of the Martinez name, her desire to start over in an environment that offered structure and security, it all made sense now. The federal agents, Jake said, they're not pursuing her, they're protecting her. That would be my assessment as well. Which means her cover may have been compromised, either by her enlistment in the Navy or by someone recognizing her here at the base. Jake stood up abruptly, his mind racing through the implications. We need to talk to her. She needs to know that her location might be compromised. Jake, wait. Captain Chen's voice carried a note of warning. Before we do anything, we need to contact the agents who came here. This is bigger than just Emma Martinez now. If she's been placed in witness protection and that protection has been compromised, there are protocols that need to be followed. Protocols that could get her killed if we waste time following bureaucratic procedures, Jake said. Sarah, you don't understand what these people are capable of. Emma didn't testify against some low-level criminals. If she was a witness in a RICO case, she has information that could destroy entire criminal organizations. Before Captain Chen could respond, Jake's phone buzzed with an urgent message. He read it quickly, and his face went white. Emma missed morning formation. She's not in her barracks, and no one has seen her since last night. Both officers were on their feet immediately, but before they could leave the office, Jake's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but when he answered, Emma's voice came through, tense and scared. Jake, I need your help. Can you meet me at the old storage building behind the motor pool and come alone? Emma, where have you been? Everyone is looking for you. I can't explain over the phone. Please, Jake, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. Jake looked at Captain Chen, who had heard enough of the conversation to understand the situation. She nodded grimly. Go. But take backup and stay in radio contact. 20 minutes later, Jake approached the abandoned storage building Emma had specified. The structure was scheduled for demolition and had been empty for months, making it an ideal location for a clandestine meeting. He had 2 security officers positioned at a distance, with orders to intervene if they didn't hear from him within 30 minutes. He found Emma inside the building, sitting on an overturned crate in the dim light filtering through dirty windows. She looked exhausted and frightened. More like the scared child he remembered than the determined woman she had become. Emma, what's going on? Why didn't you report for morning formation? She looked up at him with eyes that held more pain than anyone should have to carry. Because I received a message last night that changes everything. Jake, I can't stay here. I can't complete the training program. I have to disappear again. What kind of message? Emma pulled out a burner phone and showed him a text message that made his blood run cold. We know where you are, Emma. 3 days to come home, or we start eliminating people you care about. Starting with your new friend, the SEAL commander. Jake stared at the message, understanding immediately why Emma was so frightened. Who sent this? The Torino family. They're the ones I testified against in Chicago. Apparently they've been tracking my movements, and they know about you, about our connection. Emma's voice was steady, but Jake could see her hand shaking. Jake, I'm so sorry. I never wanted to drag you into this. I thought I was finally free, but they'll never let me go. The hell they won't, Jake said firmly. Emma, You're under federal protection. There are agencies whose job it is to keep you safe. Federal protection? Emma looked confused. Jake, what are you talking about? I'm not in witness protection. I left Chicago on my own after the trial ended. I've been on my own for 2 years. Now it was Jake's turn to look confused. Emma, federal agents came to the base asking questions about you. Captain Chen found records showing you in witness protection. Emma stood up suddenly, her face pale. That's impossible. After the trial, the FBI told me they couldn't offer protection because my testimony wasn't considered critical enough to warrant it. I've been running on my own ever since. A terrible possibility began to form in Jake's mind. Emma, describe these federal agents who supposedly handled your case. There were 2 of them, Agent Williams and Agent Rodriguez. They said they were from the Organized Crime Task Force. Emma paused, noticing the expression on Jake's face. Why? What is it? The agents who came to the base yesterday were named Johnson and Martinez. Emma, I think you've been played. I think someone has been impersonating federal agents to track your movements and manipulate your actions. The implications hit Emma like a physical blow. Oh, God. Jake, if they're not really federal agents, then everything they told me about staying away from law enforcement, about not contacting anyone from my past, about keeping a low profile, it was all designed to keep me isolated and vulnerable. Jake was already reaching for his radio to contact Captain Chen when they heard the sound of vehicles approaching the storage building. Through the dirty windows, they could see 3 black SUVs surrounding the structure. Jake, Emma whispered. Those aren't Navy vehicles. Jake grabbed Emma's hand and pulled her toward the back of the building, looking for another exit. Stay behind me and do exactly what I tell you. Before they could reach the rear door, the front entrance burst open and 6 men in dark suits entered. With weapons drawn at their head was a man Jake recognized from Emma's description, Agent Williams, who was apparently nothing of the sort. Miss Santos, the man said, his voice carrying a note of false courtesy. You've been very difficult to find. We've been looking for you for quite some time. I don't know what you want, Emma said, stepping slightly behind Jake. I testified at your trial 2 years ago. I told the truth. I don't have anything else to give you. The man laughed, a sound devoid of warmth or humor. Oh, but you do. You see, your testimony was very thorough. Too thorough. You provided details about our operations that went far beyond what you should have known. Details that could only have come from someone with inside access to our organization. Jake felt Emma stiffen behind him as she realized what the man was implying. You think I was working with law enforcement before the trial. You think I was an informant. We know you were. The question is, what other information did you provide to the FBI that hasn't come to light yet? What other operations did you compromise? What other arrests are coming? None, Emma said firmly. I told them everything I knew during the trial preparation. I don't have any other information. We'll see about that, the man said, gesturing to his associates. Mr. Torino is very interested in having a conversation with you. A private conversation where we can be sure you're being completely honest. Jake stepped forward, placing himself between Emma and the armed men. Gentlemen, I think there's been some confusion here. I'm Commander Jake Morrison, United States Navy SEALs. This woman is under my protection, and you're on federal property without authorization. The man who called himself Williams smiled coldly. Commander Morrison, yes, we know all about you. Decorated war hero, exemplary service record, reputation for never leaving anyone behind. Very impressive. Also very irrelevant to our current situation. Actually, it's extremely relevant, Jake said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had commanded respect in countless dangerous situations. Because I meant what I said about never leaving anyone behind. And I'm not starting now. Jake's radio crackled to life with Captain Chen's voice. Commander Morrison, this is Base Command. We have your location, and federal agents are en route. Hold your position. The man pretending to be Williams looked annoyed but not particularly concerned. Commander, you're going to have a choice to make in the next few minutes. You can walk away from this situation and live to serve your country for many more years, or you can interfere with our business and discover just how far our reach extends. Here's the thing about choices, Jake said, his hand moving slowly toward his sidearm. I learned a long time ago that the only choices worth making are the ones that let you look at yourself in the mirror afterward. And abandoning someone who saved my life isn't a choice I can live with. Emma squeezed Jake's shoulder, understanding that he was preparing to make a stand that could cost both of them their lives.
Jake, don't do this for me.
I've been running for 23 years. I can keep running. No, Jake said firmly, not taking his eyes off the armed men. You saved my life when you were 8 years old and had every reason to walk away. I'm not walking away from you now. The tension in the room was broken by the sound of approaching sirens and the whir of helicopter rotors. Through the windows, they could see military vehicles and personnel surrounding the building. The man who called himself Williams gestured to his associates, and they began backing toward the rear exit. This isn't over, Miss Santos, he called out as they prepared to leave. You can hide behind your military friends for now, but we have patience. And we have resources. We'll be waiting when you finally realize that running is all you'll ever be able to do. As the criminals fled through the back of the building, Jake maintained his defensive position until he was certain they were gone. Only then did he turn to Emma, who was staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Jake, you could have been killed, she said quietly. You could have lost everything. Your career, your reputation, your life. Why would you risk all of that for me? Jake looked at her with the same steady gaze he had shown when they were children making promises to each other in an abandoned warehouse. Because some promises are more important than personal safety. Because some people are worth any risk. And because 23 years ago, you taught me what real courage looks like. Emma felt tears she had been holding back for decades finally begin to fall. I don't know how to stop running, Jake. I don't know how to be the person who deserves the kind of friendship you're offering me. You don't have to know how, Jake said gently, taking her hands in his. You just have to be willing to try. And Emma, you don't have to do it alone anymore. Captain Chen entered the building with a team of security officers and what appeared to be genuine federal agents. As they took statements and began the process of unraveling the complex web of deception that had surrounded Emma for years, Jake stayed close to her side. Later, as they sat in Captain Chen's office while the FBI explained that Emma would indeed be placed in legitimate witness protection this time, Emma turned to Jake with a question that had been weighing on her mind. What happens to us now? She asked. If I have to disappear again, if they relocate me somewhere far from here, do we lose each other for another 23 years? Jake smiled, the same optimistic expression she remembered from their childhood. Emma, I told you once that I would never forget you, no matter how much time passed or how far apart we ended up. That promise still stands. The difference is, now I have the resources and connections to keep it. The FBI says it might be years before it's safe for me to live openly again, she said. Then I'll wait years, Jake replied simply. You saved my life when we were children, Emma. You helped me become the man I am today. If waiting a few more years is what it takes to ensure you're safe and free, then that's what I'll do. Emma looked at this man who had once been a scared 12-year-old boy, who had grown into someone capable of facing down armed criminals to protect her, who was willing to wait indefinitely for the chance to be her friend again. For the first time in decades, she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, her running days were finally coming to an end. Jake, she said quietly, when this is all over, when I'm finally free to be Emma Santos again, instead of whatever identity they give me next, I want to learn how to be the kind of person who deserves a friend like you. Emma, Jake said, reaching over to squeeze her hand, you already are that person. You always have been. You just need to give yourself permission to believe it. As federal agents explained the details of her new protection arrangement, Emma held onto Jake's hand and allowed herself to imagine a future where she wasn't looking over her shoulder, where she could build relationships that lasted longer than the time it took for her enemies to find her again. It was a future that seemed impossible just hours ago, but now, with Jake's unwavering support and the full resources of law enforcement behind her, it was beginning to seem not just possible, but inevitable. The scared children who had found each other in a Detroit warehouse all those years ago had grown into adults capable of protecting each other and fighting for the future they both deserved. And for the first time in 23 years, Emma Santos began to believe that her story might have a happy ending after all.